Hello, guys. So I am going to run another rapid game. See if we can turn out a decent video this time. Yesterday I tried a couple of times, and boy, I was just in a really bad space for some reason. And I've definitely noticed how it seems like your where your head is at can affect how well you play. So anyway, I'm going to give it another shot. I went down to like the 1460s after having been up like 1520. Um, and I wanted to actually talk about that just a little bit. Um, Chess rage, like being frustrated because of losing some games that you felt like you shouldn't have lost, is definitely a very real thing, and something that whether people actually start throwing chairs or something like that, or whether they just feel it. Um, it's definitely something that happens to people, and it's the psychological aspect of chess is something that I think probably everybody handles a little bit differently. But it's just like when I'm still learning Russian, but I've been doing that for about 7 years. But uh, reached a place a couple of times where I just felt like quitting, like the whole thing's too hard, whatever. And sometimes I get that way with chess too. And yesterday was one of those days. But it's not like I ever really considered quitting. But sometimes you do feel like, man, maybe chess isn't for me. Maybe I'm too old. Um, I always thought I was smart enough, intellectual enough, but there's a lot more to it than just your intelligence. So it has to do with decision making, has to do with timing, judgment, attention, focus, physical condition, mood, all that kind of stuff. So uh, let me leave kind of the psychological components aside for a second and get to this game. Um, I've played kind of a basic Italian here, and it's not really part of my new repertoire, but I'm often playing certain things these days that are not necessarily something that my coach and I have agreed upon. However, I'm just attempting to win some games, basically. So this particular game, I mean, our development is relatively equal. Um, it's varied a bit. And so now I've gotten his bishop to back up here. I think probably best thing for me to do in this case is just bring my knight out. Quick development is always important. I've got the g4 square well covered by my pawn on h3, so I don't anticipate any pins from that bishop or for the knight to come down. It's a pretty solid position, I think, for both sides. Relatively symmetrical as well. So, especially in symmetrical positions, it's sometimes not easy to know what you should be doing. I think a3 here is just a good prophylactic step to stop this knight from potentially coming down there at any point. And just kind of trying to put my pieces on good squares. All right, so not quite. I think what this a5 move is meant to try and prevent me from going b4, which it pretty much does. But if at any point in time this knight on c6 moves, then that move will be available to me. I haven't really decided what I want to do with my dark squared bishop here on c1. I think it's worthwhile considering e3. The only thing that does is, well, one of the things that does is it hangs this pawn. So I'm wondering if maybe considering a push for e5 might be worthwhile. Takes, I've got that guarded another time here with my knight. He's got it guarded another time. And then I've got it guarded again, and then he's got it guarded again. So I don't think that I can really do that. Now, here's something that I can do. Instead of bringing my bishop up to g5, bring it up to f4. And what that does is it adds one more defender or aggressor, whichever way you want to put it, to this particular square. Basically, previously it was just open on this diagonal and it was guarding this pawn. That pawn doesn't really need to be guarded at the moment, so I think this is good, and I've always got this escape square back on h2. Seems like I'm starting to learn how to commentate games even while playing relatively quickly. Seems to be getting better. Now, one plan while my opponent's thinking, so they're going to immediately attack my bishop. And so I think, because my goal is to maintain control of the e5 square, that just dropping the bishop back to h2 is probably the best way to go. That means this knight's not going to be able to go there, and it's kind of misplaced. If I ever move, let's say I move this knight, maybe even in the process of pushing this pawn, that it's going to open up this diagonal, the queen over here to the knight. So my opponent needs to be careful about that. You can't just let your knight hang out there on h5 forever. Another possibility here, and queen comes out. I think what they're trying to do is just attack this square again. And that's all fine and dandy. However, now I'm thinking more about this push to e5. So if I did that, then what we would get would be this guy, and then I would take, and then he would take, and I would take, and he would take, and then by that time I've got this bishop back here that can take. And so, yeah, let me just confirm that. He's got 1, 2, 3, 4 on this square, and I would have 1, 2, 3, 4 as well. And again, one of those, when this knight goes here, it's going to give me a revealed attack on the knight on h5. So rather than let him bring in an attack on this d4 square, I'm going to go ahead and push. And I feel like this is kind of a decisive point of the game where both myself and my opponent needed to make good decisions here. And I feel like my opponent may not be making such good decisions. However, I do need to consider this particular square back here. The one thing to note is if and when the queen comes down, that I can always just easily step aside with my king. So I'm going to move forward with this plan because I think it's going to net me a knight out of it, even if he comes down this direction. So what I'm expecting here is I'm expecting this knight to take, and then I would, okay, let's see if we can get the arrows right. Takes, I take back, he takes here, I move to the side. Now, basically, I've taken control of this square at that point. So he's going to have to get his queen back to a square that guards this knight, or put that knight somewhere where it's not in jeopardy. So I don't see the balance really in favor of one or the other strongly at this point. But he's definitely thinking about how he should go about the rest of this. I think one of the threats would be rook to d8, tempo against my queen, but most likely I'd just go to e2, which would then protect my bishop on c4 and would add another attacker slash protector there on e5. And actually, it'd be great if he did make that move, which obviously he didn't. Okay, so now let's talk about what's going on here. He's got this pin against my king. And so the threat is that this bishop would come down. Now, this is interesting because I also have the ability to hit his queen and protect the g2 square if that ever came under fire. But right now I don't like the prospect of him being able to take on h3. So I definitely feel like I need to do something about that. If I go here, then that's going to open up the line to his knight. He's going to have to go somewhere to protect it, which will probably be here. And then I believe I would have a move like this to hit his queen. And now the only thing he would be able to do would bring his queen here, but that's going to be guarded by this knight. And so therefore, I think by making this move here to h4, even though it doesn't win me his knight right away, the result of that is that he's got to move his queen in such a way to where I can win that knight. Now, the other thing to note that I didn't note is when he moves his queen here, and this is important, that it actually attacks my knight. And so I would need to figure out how am I going to protect that, which I didn't consider earlier. So yeah, I mean, it's all too easy to miss certain things. But I can always bring my knight back to attack the queen again. Let's see what he does. I'm assuming he's going to do that. To go to g5. I don't necessarily want to draw out of this game, like to repeat positions. So let's see what happens. Yeah, there it goes. I mean, one, considering putting my queen here, because that threatens check here, and then that rook is unprotected. So he could actually take my knight and really wouldn't be a problem for me. Again, another move under consideration is bringing the knight back. One of the seemingly obvious moves would be to put my bishop here. But what that does is it allows him to take. He wins a pawn, and then he's getting a much more aggressive position, which I don't really like. Now the question, though, is if I move my queen here, I'm taking away the natural square for my knight to go to, whatever it needs to escape, if he doesn't take. So, I mean, I guess one way to protect it is like this. This is where the calculation aspect can get relatively complex. And I believe, like I often say, for better or worse, I'm going with this move here. Again, he's more than welcome to take my knight, because after that I get a nice attack and I win the rook on e8. And then I also actually put pressure on this knight again. So I'll happily give up my knight for the rook and a very aggressive position. Also locking in his light squared bishop, because, at least momentarily, because his rook is standing behind it. So if I get my queen there on e8, I got a pin on that bishop against the rook. Considering that he's taking this much time, I'm assuming that he sees the threats. Yeah, all right. So, how to respond here? I think essentially the thing to do is to renew that threat, and we'll see whether he takes with the pawn or with the rook. Since it's a renewed threat, it doesn't really give him an option to take here. Okay, so I think at this point, that bishop threat is gone now. So if I need to get my knight out of there, I can easily come here. And I actually kind of like that. And then I can potentially, eventually, make some threats against his queen. Although, one option that I see here is knight there. But let's go ahead and start with this guy. And I like this. He doesn't have this move to pin the knight to my queen because of this pawn. Now, the one thing I didn't really check, but I see now, is that this pawn is actually protected with two pieces, both the rook and my bishop. It's attacked with two pieces, so I'm good. Now, one thing I would expect him to consider, or if I were him, probably double up the rooks. But, again, his queen is in very tight quarters. And one threat that I can easily make would be bringing this pawn up, because it'd be protected by the knight. Seems like another relatively critical position. We got through that last one without much change in advantage one way or the other. However, whether I'm right or wrong about this, I'm not ultimately sure, but I think that my position is becoming better than his. without necessarily. I mean, I always want to threaten the queen, but there is another threat here, which is more immediately deadly, I think, which is to go to g4. Then essentially his knight is trapped. However, I can't actually take it until my king were to get out of this pin, move to the side. So, yeah, so he's got another attacker, and so I'm outgunned, basically, right here. So one of the things I'm thinking about is threats against this queen. And this is the move that immediately comes to mind. The queen could come back, which is probably what he'd do because he doesn't want to lose this knight. And then the question would be, what do I have after that? I don't know, actually. But this, giving up the protection of this pawn, knight to e4, does a good job of attacking the queen. And it also brings more pieces to the area where the battle is taking place. So I think I'm going to give up worrying about that pawn for the moment. And like Levi Rosman says, danger levels. You might be attacking my pawn, threatening the middle of the board, which, yeah, it's important, but it's not nearly as important as your queen is. And now I'm thinking that if he moves his queen back, that since I didn't move h4, then I am going to have this square. Oh, okay. So, all right. That is something I did not anticipate, which is a counterattack on my queen. So I can take here. He'll take here. So I need to count up material. So if I take this queen, he does an intermediate move right here to take my queen. And then I've got to take back. So I get a queen and a knight. And then he takes back. And he's got a queen and a knight. And one of the things he's got is this attack on my rook. So I would lose a rook at the end of that. So I don't think that offers me anything of value. And I most certainly don't want to take over here. Now, if I were, then the queen takes back. I don't have any way of trapping his queen because he's always got this g6 escape square. So I think that most likely the best thing for me to do at this moment in time, well, is to seek refuge for my queen. But my queen is what's guarding this guy here. So I actually believe that I've got a decent way out of this, which is just to take back. So it's the only way he's causing me problems is by having the knight there. If he wants to take with his rook, perfectly okay with that. He's gonna win one rook, but I win his queen. So when we get out of all this, material is going to be probably relatively equal, but I think I'm going to be up by just a couple in material, and I'll still have my queen left, and I'll have some attacking potential. Because if he actually takes this knight, then I can take this knight. So I haven't calculated the overall net result for every situation. And probably like in a tournament game, I would do that to make absolutely 100% sure that I'm making a beneficial trade the way that things are working out. However, in this particular case, when time is limited, I think that generally approximations have to be acceptable in some terms. Now, if he does happen to take me here, then rather than losing a rook, I think I would just take him back here with my rook. That's essentially just trading rooks then. At this point, after having evaluated the position a little bit further, honestly, I think he's lost. Because I believe that after all is said and done, I'm going to be up probably by at least a piece. Worst case scenario, maybe +2. Best case scenario, maybe +5. Depending on how he handles this position. Okay. Well, I think that's a mistake. Now I'm +10. He takes back. Obviously, he's threatening this knight. But in some regard, I just don't really care. I just don't really care. I think because, all right, so let's talk about this a little bit. I'm up +5. I've got my queen. He's got no queen. I'm just going to start trading material. Now, one threat he could eventually potentially get with the pieces that he has would be a back rank mate if this dark squared bishop were set up along this this diagonal. That could spell some trouble for me. But I just really don't see any of that happening anytime soon. So now that doesn't mean I should ignore any threat, because there's this teeny tiny little threat right here on F2, because he's got this diagonal and this rook. So we're just going to cut that counterplay out. He may try to do something sneaky by pushing this pawn forward, the revealed attack of my queen. And that's kind of, when you're lost, those are the desperate things that you tend to resort to, but that's not going to work. Okay, so he wants to grab a pawn. I definitely want to improve my queen's position. So I am just going to come down here and protect that pawn, considering that I'm optimizing where my queen is located. Now, eventually, one of the things I might like to do is get to this square with a check. So that's something to think about, because then I could pick up that rook. I don't have any immediate ability to do so, but I think that it's kind of the essence of long-term planning. Looking at the possibilities that you have available to you. Okay, so that's not really going to do a whole lot. Come down here. C2. Threatening this pawn. Yeah. Just going to improve these pawns. Definitely should I don't know. It doesn't happen much at this level, but um, I think he should resign. All right. So since he's got a dark square bishop, I'm going to put my pawns on the light squares, and then that's going to free up my queen and eventually my rook to roam wherever they feel like roaming. And as a matter of fact, let's do this so I can get my king off of the pin here. Bring my king up to g2, and then I'm going to have a lot more freedom in the position. And actually, I like possibly putting this pawn here. That way he's not going to be able to bring the rook over to f5. Obviously, my queen covers that at the moment. But what I really want to do is just go for the possible... Well, he's moving his king forward, so I'm not quite sure what all I've got here. I think just coming up here. One thing in the end game like this to just keep in mind is what color square is your opponent's bishop on. And he's got a dark square bishop, so that is never going to be able to access any of my pawns on light squares. The rook can do so, and the pawns can do so, and the king can. But that bishop, it's completely off limits. So there's just not much he's going to be able to do. So I think my plan here basically is just to go ahead and bring my queen over, challenge his rook with my rook. He's going to want to come here, but he's not going to have that square available to him any longer. So pretty soon everything's going to get cut off. So eventually what I would do would be to move this pawn up to f3, move my king up potentially, or I don't even have to, but he's not going to have the same type of threat there. So yeah, coming here. Again, I want to just challenge him here. I don't really have anything that can reasonably challenge the bishop. Okay, so he's going to try some shenanigans as far as maybe pushing forward. I can grab that bishop. I almost kind of have a mind to come up here and maybe just take off the bishop and grab that pawn. Even though I'm trading down, it's only a pawn, and I'll still be up +4 with the queen against the rook. It'll be the end of things. Yeah, I mean, one of the things to note here is I've got 5.5 minutes. My opponent has about 2.5 minutes. So unless I mess things up royally, I don't see this going anywhere for him. And actually, regarding these people who say never resign no matter what, well, I think a lot of beginners take that too seriously. Too strictly, shall we say. Yeah, I mean, if there are still any reasonable possibility, if there's a reasonable possibility, reasonable chances, sure, continue to play. However, if there aren't any really reasonable possibilities to get anything done, or, to win the game, et cetera, then I think the thing to do is just to resign. People always have the option to continue playing on. That's the way it should be. But again, I think etiquette-wise, resignation still has its place, regardless of all those never resigners. So I wouldn't be surprised to see a resignation here soon, but very often at this level, people tend to play on no matter what. I think he's anticipating me sacking a rook here and doesn't want me to be able to take back. There's a couple of different possibilities, but I think the one I like the best is just opening up his king. So, I mean, I expect he'll take back, and then I'll just take back with my rook. And his king will be more open than it was before. One thing I can do is just advance this pawn and aim to get my queen in here to g5. So I don't know what he's doing. He's like, oh, yeah. I think what he's trying to do is get eventually some kind of empty check, but what he'd really like to do is get his rook here next to my queen. And now I'll tell you what, now's probably a good time for that sack I was talking about. So let's go ahead and just do that. Because, yeah, I mean, he can get a check. But again, it's not really going to do much for him. I mean, he's playing desperately here. So, I mean, okay, thank you. All right, so let's go through the analysis of this. It's been a relatively long game anyway, so let's see if we can make it relatively quick. So let's just look at the review before we do anything else. Looks like I've got, 82% accuracy. My opponent is about 70%. When you look at the game, it looks like I had the advantage pretty much the entire game, and a serious advantage like the second half of the game. Although it looks like I may have blundered or played some inaccurate moves in the middle that gave my opponent more opportunity than maybe what they should have had. So let's go through that and see what that was. All book moves until there. Computer seems to like most of my moves, thinks that's an inaccuracy. Well, I would agree. It likes that retreat of the bishop. You can see that my advantage now is pretty high. I wanted him to bring his knight back, which he didn't. It does like my pawn push. It didn't want me to take back. Okay, so let's look at this line here where the knight comes up. And the computer suggests then, and I'm just following the engine moves, that would happen at that point. Okay, so basically instead of taking back, the computer wants me to have threatened that queen. Queen moves back out of the way. And then I push the knight back. And then I take on e5, and I'm still covering with this bishop. Oops. Still covering with the bishop and attacking that knight. So, yeah, that would have been a fantastic line. However, I did not see this particular move. It's kind of the things that computers tend to pick up on that humans don't. But I think that that's one way of improving our chess. So I want to see just one thing. If I did go there, and let's say that he went here, well, that's supposed to be a blunder, because then I would have h4, and he doesn't and then his queen is trapped. Yeah, that's a queen trap right there. So that's why he needed to move back on that. But yeah, I mean, that's to catch that is involves examining a lot of squares in terms of where the queen has to run. Now I believe, okay, so this is the middle of the game where it didn't like this move. And I kind of agree. I felt like maybe I was going for something slightly dubious there. But I felt like I was going to have a way out of it no matter what. And it looks like, all right, so yeah, computer's questioning that move because I can easily take out the knight with my bishop. And I think once I recognized that it was all downhill for my opponent from there, because I don't know why he decided to take that bishop back with the rook. That was just a big mistake. So take there, and why he didn't take my rook is a mystery to me, because he'd be winning a rook that way, and why he wouldn't make the best of it, I really have no idea. The rest of it, as they say, is pretty much just technique. Again, it's important to remember what color your opponent's bishop is on and try to keep your pieces on the opposite color as much as possible. Now, interestingly here, it shows that as a decent move. However, my opponent would actually have this move there, and I probably would put him in check and I could get my rook out of it, but that was something that I wasn't watching very closely. Okay, and so again, yeah, that opens up the king. I decide to sack. He decides he's going to go for some desperate stuff. And all right, so this is a good reason why it's good to review, because what did I do here? I decided, hey, oh, actually, I didn't even make a move. I was thinking about bringing my queen up to d5 because that threatens checkmate over here on h5. And I'm glad that my eyes were more tuned towards checkmate than towards winning material. However, obviously, that's why my opponent resigned, was I could just take off his rook. So, again, I was kind of laser focused on getting the guy in mate and not so much on winning that rook, but that would have, easily been the end of the game as well. So, okay, I hope you guys found this valuable. It was a fun, interesting game. It was a little bit long, but yeah, leave some comments. Let me know if you liked the material, if you feel like I should be changing anything. Give me some advice, whatever, but let's all improve at chess together. Thanks, guys, and we'll see you again later.